You are here to learn how to read a period study particle physics. While it's true that it's non-chronological narrative, there is really no right or wrong way to read it. I'm just here in this video to explain to you the chronology of how the book was written and how it was arranged in the sequence it was arranged in, so that you'll have a better understanding of the story no matter how you read it. If you read it the way I describe, or if you read it straight from beginning to end, you'll still get the whole story. But before I start talking about it, I'm already talking about it, but let me read an excerpt from the acknowledgments it tells about where I discussed it. There were times during the manuscript building that I also did not fully understand what I was doing, what kind of monster I was creating. All I knew was that I wanted to give my readers a joke to tell, a sight gag to portray, and that the shape of the story in it was semi-spherical, like the globular clusters that I had studied, but that the linear movement of the plot was supposed to place the beginning of the narrative near the end, yet not in a closed circle like Samuel Beckett's plays, an open circle, like the shape in the sand in the Wander Scene narratives of Mangled Doves. I have noticed that you still haven't bought a copy of that yet.
Does that suck?
What? That's uncalled for.
You guys have got an ad with America's favorite old fart, reading a book in front of a fireplace.
There's no fireplace here. Okay, never mind. Okay, so Mangled Doves, the very first book that I published, contained all of the prose and poetry that I had written all the way up to 2010 when I published it. It didn't sell very well because for a prose anthology, nobody would buy it because of all the poetry in it. And for poetry buyers, they wouldn't buy it because of all the prose in it. So recently, I have published a collection called This and That, a novella, and several other prose writings, which contains none of the poetry. And it also includes all the short stories and stuff that are referenced in A Period Study Particle Physics. So this is a good book to get if you want to follow up on all the references in this novel. And the poetry I published in Verses for the Vixen and Other Poems. It's a lot smaller. It's only $9.99. It's only in paperback, by the way. But there are a couple of references to the poems in the novel, so it might still be worth buying. There is a hardback edition of This and That for $798. It's called the Epi-Pen edition, priced that way so that in case I ever need an Epi-Pen, I'll be able to afford to buy one. Don't fret though, the paperback is only $19.99. Yes, $19.99. The hardback edition of A Period Study Particle Physics is $44 even. The paperback edition is $24.99. I'm still working on the revisions for the ebook edition. It's been released at $2.99, but there is some revisions that have to be done to it. So the text is not, I think it's a bit corrupted towards the end of the book. But let me not get into details like that. In 2014, I published on my blog site a summary of A Period Study Particle Physics. I put a link to it in the description below. You can look it up if you want to read that to see what this novel is supposed to be like. When I was first preparing the manuscript, my friend Patricia Prieto advised me not to put the older writings at the beginning of the novel, that somebody who bought a book with these two words in the title would expect that the first part of the novel would be about that subject. So she said, people are going to get disappointed real fast if they open it up and find out that it's starting out with stuff about philosophy and stuff. So I moved that to the end of the book. That's your first clue about the chronology of the novel. The texts which are at the beginning of the story are in the beginning of the appendix, at the end of the book, not at the beginning of the story. So, here is the last page of the table of contents. The appendix includes the magic of repetition, the famous desk test narratives, and other questions and other answers and questions. Those are texts that I had posted on Yahoo Answers back when it was a viable website. I had developed quite a following and a few fans of the way I answered questions in a narrative style, disrespectful somewhat, comical most often. So I had quite a bit of a following, And a friend of mine, Harry Lowry, and another friend, Lee Lutz, invited me to work with them on a blogging website called Bread and Circles. On that website, we wrote The Meaning of Life, Whence Cometh Evil, and The Final Truth. Those 3 blog entries, my contributions to them, I published in here as the Behemoth Saga. I included the street date announcements from my blog so that it would be chronologically suited to the sequence. And then, of course, following that was prefatory comments from my blog where I had discussed my writings. But that's really the beginning of the story. The Magic of Repetition and the Behemoth Saga are the beginning of this novel. And then, of course, the narrative beginning is Deconstructing Quarks, that I wrote entirely on my blog. The second chapter, Outstanding in the Field, I massively revised for the publication of the novel. In the blog, it was just a script with only the dialogue and attribution flags like a script. For the novel, I expanded it to a full narrative with description and descriptive attribution flags like, he said, stuff like that. But outside of that, I did not modify the text for publication in the novel because this is the thing that represents the novel. Dissing Economics, at the beginning of the first chapter, Seeking a Healthy Alternative, I added a large transitional passage to go from Deconstructing Quarks into the economics segment. But beyond that, I did not modify the text from the original posting. Now, when I had published on the blog site these stories, or these chapters, when I finished writing the series, I was very nervous about people reporting the blog as being inappropriate content. So I compiled all the articles into a single page and published the page by itself and deleted the original articles. So I did not have original posting dates for my footnotes in the novel. So I apologize for that, but I was very nervous about the content. Also, the fact that I did not really talk that much about economics in the Dissing Economics segment, I was also very nervous about being called out for that. When I put the manuscript together for the novel, I heavily researched economic history and economic theories, Wikipedia mostly, and wrote 4 extra chapters at the end of the sequence. Once and Only Once, Classical and Keynesian Economics, Unacceptable Comparisons, and the Aspiration to Non-Existence. Heavily researched content, but that's where the dirty part is. So if you want to read the dirty part, you're going to be studying a lot of economics in my novel. So now let's move on to the second page of the table of contents. Misguided Notions of Internet Journalism. The first chapter of that segment I revised heavily for the novel. Pronunciation woes. I expanded the chapter a great deal for the novel, but the rest of that segment I did not revise the chapters at all. Against Conspiracy Theorists was really my most popular article series on my blog, so I left that entirely unrevised. I wanted it to be exactly like what people who followed my blog would expect it to say. For Inappropriate Pictures on Hospital Walls, the second chapter I had to rewrite completely. In the blog, I used pictures from a popular photographer, and I contacted their legal team to see what I needed to do in order to be able to use their pictures on my blog. And the guy said, well, if it's a non-profit blog, if you're not making any money off of it, all you have to do is put a citation of where you got the pictures from in your blog's text, which I did. On the pictures, I put a link to the website where I got the pictures from, so I covered my legal bases with that. But then when I contacted him later when I was going to make the novel, he said, oh, well, we didn't think that we were talking about something that was going to end up being profit-based when we first talked. In order to use the pictures in your novel, you would have to pay licensing fees, which would be like about $1,100 for the first 100 copies of the novel, Well, one, I didn't know if the novel was going to sell that many copies, and two, I couldn't afford that for, I believe it was like 5, maybe 6 photographs that I was using, because it was going to be per picture. $1,100 for a single photograph to be used in 100 copies of my novel. So that would be 1,100 times 6 for 100 copies of the novel. That's an awful lot of money for something that I didn't think was going to sell more than maybe 5 or 6 copies. So I said, I can't pay that. How do I get around this? He said, you're just going to have to rewrite the story. Just rewrite the story just because I can't get licensing for something that was okay when it was free? So I had to basically rewrite that chapter to show that the pictures were previously there but were no longer there. And I had to rewrite the narrative to suit the fact that they were absent. I left the descriptions of the pictures in the text and sent the legal team pictures from other photographers of similar content so that I could safely say that the descriptions in the novel that reference these pictures do not necessarily represent your client's photographs. So that legally covered my butt with that. The rest of that segment is unrevised. Misguided notions of journalistic intent. About halfway through that segment was when I decided to put the stuff into a novel. So In the Oils of Cooking and A Spray of Ceramic Particles, I believe, are on the blog as they are published in the novel. But the last 3 chapters, Dancing on the Head of a Pin, Concocting Tilapia Fricassee, and So Yeah, Then There's That, are not on the blog at all. I literally wrote them directly into the manuscript. Unrelated content contains Hermagoras Forgotten, which was published on the Bread and Circles website, which is in the appendix, but I put Hermagoras Forgotten in. Unrelated content is supposed to be like an epilogue or a coda to the novel. The novel's proper ending is at So Yeah, Then There's That. But unrelated content is kind of like a coda. The philosophy in it, unpublishable content, Demoralizing the Egocentric Optimist, and On the Winners of Wars were all taken from my blog from before Deconstructing Quarks. Morsel Transcendentalism and the Shallow Metaphor was completely rewritten for the novel. It's based on a Yahoo Answers text, which is from The Magic of Repetition. Poems best left unwritten. If you've seen them, you know I did not have to make any changes to that for the novel. The Pumpkinification of Brash is a series of poems that I wrote for Patricia Prieto back in 1999 and early 2000. And Regressive Traits and Animal Hominids was freshly written for this novel. The publication method is basically the text is reversed at the letter level, not the word level. Holding the book up to a bathroom mirror to read it will not help you because the letters are not reversed, just the sequencing of them. The way to read the chapter is to go to the very end of the chapter and read it from right to left, starting at the bottom of the page and working way up the page. And the chapter is entirely reversed. It slows you down an awful lot. So hopefully it'll help you engage with the dreamlike state of the chapter. But that is how A Period in Study Particle Physics was written. As I said, I've got links in the description below for my blog entry, for links to this and that, and verses for the Vixen. And I think that's all I need to say right now. Look forward to my Clockwork Angels video, probably sometime next week. And I think I'm done. And I didn't even mention moon pies at all. Whoops, yeah, I just did.